Well, last week, Kamal, you went to that press conference that was held by the families of the Nottingham knife attack victims, where they laid bare, frankly, the abject failures by multiple authorities in the care given to diagnosed schizophrenic Valdo Calocane in the months and years leading up to him killing 19-year-old students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar and 65-year-old school caretaker Ian Coates in June 2023.
Yes, that press conference was actually at the moment that an NHS England report was published. It was initially only going to be published in summary, but the family's pressure meant that it was eventually published in full, and it detailed a catalogue of missed opportunities. It said how Calocane had stopped taking medication, he had stopped attending appointments, a number of police forces were aware of him following violent episodes, he'd been sectioned and then released. There were psychiatrist warnings that Calocane, quotes, will end up killing someone. As we have spoken about so many times, Camilla, here's another official report which showed a long list of failings.
And despite the grief that they've been having to deal with, this has been a fight for the families, hasn't it? We first spoke to Barnaby Webber's mother, Emma, on the Daily Tea about the fight that they had pushing for murder charges. Last January, Calocane was convicted of manslaughter on the basis of diminished responsibility due to his history of mental health issues. The family were unhappy about that, thought that he did show an intention to kill. He had laid in wait, basically, with a knife for these bystanders who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. A review by the CPS was ordered, and in March it concluded that, although prosecutors had been right to accept Calocane's pleas of manslaughter, that they could have handled the case better. The decision also went to the Court of Appeal, but a judge upheld that verdict in May. And then a few months later, in August of last year, a review published by the Care Quality Commission, the CQC, found, quotes, a series of errors, omissions and misjudgments by the mental health services. Then an inquiry was launched by the Independent Office for Police Conduct, the IOPC, which is looking into both Leicestershire and Nottinghamshire police's involvement. And Emma told us last week that she'd seen the Leicestershire review and was horrified. So they have been pushing and pushing and pushing. I've got so much admiration for these families. They're not going to let it lie, and fair play to them.
And I've also said, we're not the experts, but if it hadn't been for the work that the families have done, none of these issues would have come to light. And when I spoke to Emma Webber last week at the press conference, she made it clear that all these different reports, they all had to be brought together. And she wanted to not only meet Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, and Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, and the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, but she demanded, and the families are demanding and have demanded, a full public inquiry so that not only could the failings be identified, but the people who made the failings could be called to account, which is really what the families want, as well as a discussion about how people like Valdo Calocane, they say, of course, he was mentally ill, but these are still murders. These young people, and also Ian Coates, who is older, were murdered by Valdo Calocane. And so they want all of that to be unpicked. And she said she was going to this meeting. This meeting happened yesterday. The Prime Minister has agreed to a full statutory inquiry. So at last, the families are being listened to properly.
Well, our producer, Georgia Cohen, went to Downing Street to meet with some of the family members after that meeting with Keir Starmer. And first of all, she asked David Webber, that's Barnaby's dad, for his reaction to the news.
I've said it a few times. I was gobsmacked. I went in, I was expecting a bit of a battle because everything's been a battle. But we didn't have one. We didn't need one. The Prime Minister set out his stall very quickly. That we're having a statutory public inquiry. He doesn't want this dragging on, so within sort of 2 to 3 weeks it'll go through Parliament, and then it'll be put in motion, and he wants it sort of done and dusted within the next 2 years. So it's a flood of emotions, I can describe it. I never say I'm happy because I don't think I know what that feels like anymore, but I am happy that we've managed to get what we fought so hard to get.
And what are your emotions today? I know you just said, but how do you feel in terms of, finally getting to this point after fighting for so long?
It's, as I say, it's really difficult to sum it up because it's been such a fight. Everything's been such a fight. Not with the government, and that's not been, the biggest fight at all. And they've actually, come to the party and they've actually, Keir has done what he said he was going to do, and that's important. But we have had to fight with so many different agencies, and the Prime Minister used the term, the wagon circling. We've had to, try and outmaneuver all agencies. It's just that shouldn't happen. We shouldn't have to drive the way we've had to drive to get, the answers we need, to drive accountability, so that we can make change in the name of those, those beautiful people. My son, Grace. Ian, and we also don't want to forget the 3 poor people that are still with us, that have had life-changing injuries, mentally, physically. We need to drive change in this country. I think every time you turn the news on, it becomes a little bit more depressing, and I think change has to happen.
Do you think that fight has compounded the grief in many ways?
Oh yes, yeah, because you can't sit and lick your wounds, and you can't get on with. I don't know what moving forward looks like, but you can't get on with what that is. You sit in this, and I always call it this vortex of hell of just sitting in this world. You're thinking, why am I here? Why are these people doing this? Why do I have to fight for what is logic? What's a logical answer? Everything we've asked and everything we've said is, nothing. I know we've got Sinead and Sandra who are both doctors, and they will look at things medically, but actually a lot of the stuff we're asking isn't. We're not technically asking. It's basic questions that they don't want to answer because actually they can't answer them, or they don't want to answer them. It's hard, to keep this fight up.
And finally, what would be a positive outcome for you with this inquiry?
I think we want the truth out there. So the truth, whatever that truth is, needs to drive accountability. Because we believe, we've had all the way through all the systems broken. So, we understand the systems broken, but people make systems. So you need to make changes. And if these people aren't doing what they should be doing, and I'm not saying they're bad people, but they've got into bad habits, maybe it needs to change. And so for me, it's making people do their jobs properly. Because I think if people do their jobs properly, especially in those types of organisations, it keeps the public safe. And we've got, the bottom line is if you haven't got public safety, I don't know what you've got. We can't. I have so many people say to me, I've never been scared to walk down the street, but I'm a little bit worried now. And I've got friends that are deeply affected by this that say that to me. And you think, these are people that would never say that, but they've seen what's happened, and now they're thinking, that should never. We shouldn't in a society have that kind of thought. But we are starting to get that, and then all the other things that are compounding it, all these other, the knife crime in this country is off the scale. We've got to ask some serious questions, and it's, some of those questions are going to be very painful for people to answer, but they need to be asked, and if they're not asked, so I'm hoping that we can start this process that will hopefully, this isn't going to make a difference to the knife crime epidemic, even though he had got hold of knives. But it hopefully will start a process. It will start some of the difficult questions being asked, and get answers.
And then Georgia spoke to Grace O'Malley-Coomer's brother James and Barnaby's brother Charlie. She started by asking James what it was like to go into Downing Street to meet the Prime Minister.
Yeah, no, it was a surreal experience, but now we're out, it's really great to look back and see how encouraging it was. It's definitely steps in the right direction. I think it's lovely to see Dad feels like the weight has been relieved off his shoulders, and I know being at school I've been kind of on the sidelines spectating, but I've seen every single day Mum and Dad have put in a truly hard fight, and I know Dad feels the guilt of not being able to be there to protect his daughter, but I think what he's done the last 2 years in terms of pushing for this has really shown through now, and I think he's now done her justice, and she will definitely be most proud of him.
Same for you, Charlie.
Yeah, just like I said in interviews, just echoing what James is saying, it's just
huge relief to finally get, moving in the right direction, finally get these failings sorted out, finally get the truth out there, what's right out there. Yeah, it's just an amazing feeling today.
And for you, what does justice look like here? What would you hope to happen after this inquiry in the future to make sure it doesn't happen again?
I think, simply put plainly, just to see what should have happened in the first place, in the first trials, put right. What went wrong put right, the failings put right. That's to me what justice feels like.
I think, obviously, I hope this never happens to anyone else, but I think in the case that it does, it should be a much more plain sailing event, a much more plain sailing series of events for them than we've had. And I think it's, as I said, it's been well worth the fight, but every intersection there has been with authorities has felt like there's been something waiting for us around the corner which has become uncovered because of the hard work that we've done. Other than that, I think all of it would have been brushed under the carpet and we could have just moved on with being oblivious to many, many failings.
What has this done to you and your families having to fight for this over the past couple of years?
I think it's given all of us something to work towards in our loved one's name. For us, Grace, for the Webbers, it's been Bonnie, and for the coach, it's been Ian. I think we've all had a common goal of wanting to do our loved ones proud, and I think by this statutory public inquiry, which will be judge-led, as the Prime Minister said, we'll be able to find the accountable individuals and those who make up the systems which failed us, how they failed us, who has failed us, and hopefully the country can become a safer place and a better place.
Do you think it's about your legacy now for both your siblings?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this could be the turning point. This could be the symbol in all incidents like this. Barney, Grace, and Ian to change what happened to us and make sure it never, ever, ever happens again to other people. Because when something so horrible happens, God forbid it happens, it should be dealt with in the way you'd expect. There should be grievance, then there should be no failings. The court should make the right decision, and I think it's just really important to me and to James and to our families and to the coach that this never happens again.
It happened to you both so young, didn't it? I mean, how do you think it's changed your future and what you both want to do next?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it feels like it was yesterday, and then sometimes it feels like it was 10 years ago. It's really quite a difficult concept to grasp, and if I can at all even grasp in the slightest bit, I think once we have potentially cleared up with our individual course of events, I think I'll definitely be pioneering for wider policy reform, whether that be in knife crime or whether that be in the mental health bill, as we have already done. But I think in some way, shape or form, I'll definitely be pushing for wider policy reform to make sure that ultimately this country is a safer place for everyone.
I mean, like we've all said before, this fight never stops now. It's something that we've all been lumped into together by this horrific event, and it's just for the rest of my life now, like I've said already, whatever I go on to do, whatever we all go on to do, this is always going to be here. It's always going to be a fight. We have to fight, but we're always going to be there to give our 100% effort because this is so important to all of us.
I had 2 extra questions. I just wanted to ask you, in terms of how you've been coping with your grief as well, do you have kind of any advice that you could share maybe to someone who is going through sibling loss right now or that grief, and what would you say to them having been through it yourself?
I think it's a very difficult question because I don't quite know if I have properly grieved yet, but what I would say is I am guilty of this, but there's no need to put on a brave face. I think in social situations it can be very difficult, especially at school, and you don't want to cause a scene, but I think it's also important to get some downtime, and if you do need to let your emotions out, then let them go, because ultimately that is how you will get them out and how you will try and come to terms with what you can. So I think there's no need to put it behind a brave face, but I also think that there needs to be more support for victims. Our whole process has been, we've had very little support. I think Charlie would agree with me that as our families have gone through this whole thing, we've had minimal support. So I think going forwards, if this does ever happen to anyone else, the victims need to be at the forefront of the minds of the government and for agencies to help them as soon as possible.
So Charlie speaking there is 17, James is 18, displaying so much maturity. And God, the mind boggles, really. They're having to support their parents, they're having to process their own grief. They've admitted there that this will come to define the rest of their lives, fighting for justice for the siblings that were taken so viciously and cruelly from them. And sometimes we just don't think about other family members. We associate these kind of quests for justice with the parents, understandably so. Thinking about Doreen Lawrence, for instance, and others that campaign. But yeah, it's sort of brings a tear to my eye, but it's heartwarming, the love that they're showing.
And more power to them, and more power to their hope, and the point they make that it has been to the families, but it's brought the families together as a new sort of bigger family, which I think is rather lovely to think of. I'm just reminded of a point that was raised by their solicitor at the press conference last week. There have been over 500 reports about killings and violent assaults that have been connected to mentally unwell people. 500. And we're still in a situation now where institutions are defensive. They don't want to be transparent. They are not honest about what has happened. Every institution that this family has had to deal with since those appalling events has failed those families. Not just failed them by the mistakes that have been made in the treatment of Valdo Calocane, but failed them after the murders about how they have dealt with the families. Everything has been defensive. And if the families had not kept demanding answers, we would have just thought, this is all very sad. Everything that was done, everything that should have been done was done, and everyone would have moved on.
Yeah.
From the prosecuting authorities to the police, police forces involved, to the hospitals and NHS experts involved, they all wanted to move on. I hope that this public inquiry makes a difference, and I hope that the freshness of James and Charlie and Ian Coates' son as well, who's been a fantastic voice on this, can be remembered. But I fear that the institutions again will try and close up, just as we saw in Grenfell, just as we saw with Doreen Lawrence and the death of her son Stephen Lawrence, and will try and say nothing to see here.
Well, we'll be probing it. I mean, we'll cover the inquiry when it happens as much as we can on the Daily Tea, and continue to speak to the Webbers, the Coateses, and indeed the O'Malley Kumars